very good name to all pious yogis and upasakas and upasikas. So I hope everyone has been practicing the threefold trainings, or training in morality, training in calmness or concentration, and wisdom diligently. This meaning, we shall continue to discuss about the six sense bases, in the words, the world, loka. In the previous Dhamma talk, we quote a discourse, there's Lohitasa. So in this discourse, the Buddha explains the true meaning of loka. So the Buddha said to Lohitasa, I quote, however, friend, I say that without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of suffering. It is in just this 6 feet long carcass endowed with perception and mind that I make known of the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way leading to the cessation of the world. And then we also did explain about the six consciousness. Every consciousness is arising dependent on conditions. Without a condition, there is no arising of consciousness. So the experience of one's own world depends on one's karmic actions. So in another discourse where the Buddha also taught about going to the end of the world, the Buddha said to the bhikkhus, a group of bhikkhus, I say that the end of the world cannot be known, seen, or reached by traveling. Yet bhikkhus also say that without reaching the end of the world, there is no making an end to suffering. But the Buddha did not explain in details of these short teachings, this synopsis of the teaching. So this group of bhikkhus decided to see Venerable Ananda, because Venerable Ananda is always praised by the teacher, by the Buddha, and respected by his wise brothers in the holy life. So this group of bhikkhus went to see Venerable Ananda. So this group of bhikkhus told the brief teachings given by the Buddha, but the Buddha did not explain in details to them. So then Venerable Ananda explained to them. The Venerable Ananda said, I understand the detailed meaning of this synopsis as follows: that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world or conceiver of the world, is called the world of the noble one's disciplines. And what is that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world? So Venerable Ananda said, the I is that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world. Then the Buddha, Venerable Ananda also explains in the same way to the other five sense bases. The other five sense bases are the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. The mind is that in the world by which one is a perceiver of the world, a conceiver of the world. This is called the world in the noble one's disciplines. Usually, the scriptures would refer to the teachings of Buddha as a Dhamma, but in this discourse, the teachings of the Buddha is referred as noble one's disciplines. So, after explaining to this group of bhikkhus, Venerable Ananda said to them, I understand the meaning of this synopsis in detail to be thus, and if you wish, you may go to see the Buddha and ask him the meaning of this, and the Buddha will explain to you, and you should remember it. So this group of bhikkhus went to see the Buddha and repeated the answer given by the Venerable Ananda to the Buddha. And the Buddha replied that Ananda is wise. Ananda has great wisdom. If you had asked me the meaning of this, I would have explained it to you in the same way that it has explained by Ananda. So here, the world, they are called the world. The six sense bases are called the world because they are the condition for being a perceiver and a conceiver of the world. If there are no six sense bases, then do you think a person is able to perceive the world and conceive the world? For example, if a person is blind, then this blind person would not be able to perceive the visible objects. So this blind person cannot perceive the visible world. So that's why the six sense bases here are known as the world because they are the condition for being a perceiver and a conceiver of the world. So when there's a visible object comes into contact with the eye, then there's the arising of this consciousness. So in other words, one is able to perceive this visible world. Then based on what is being perceived through the eye base, then one will conceive various kinds of thoughts or ideas in the mind. But one may not be able to perceive the reality, conceive the world correctly. So as long as the mind is defiled by craving, tanha, by mana, conceit, or egoisms, and ditthi, wrong view, then one may not able to perceive the reality. One may conceive the world with mental defilements. So, in other words, due to illusion or vipallasa in Pali, one is not able to perceive reality. So there are these three kinds of illusions. Illusion of perception, illusion of mind, and illusions of view. So these three kinds of illusion in Pali, they are Sanya Viparasa, Citta Viparasa, and Ditthi Viparasa. So they are translated as illusion of perception, illusion of mind, and illusion of view. Then it's because of these three kinds of illusion, then one will not able to see things as they really are, or in other words, one cannot see the reality. In other words, these three kinds of illusion takes the impermanent to be permanent. These three kinds of illusion takes what is suffering to be pleasurable. So these three kinds of illusion takes what is not self to be self. So these three kinds of illusion take what is unattractive to be attractive. So when the perception is not correct, then it will may lead to arising of other mental defilements and unwholesome actions. Due to viparasa, one is not able to be free from samsara, or liberated from the cycle of birth and death. So when perception is wrong, what is being conceived is also not right. For example, due to illusion of perception, one conceives that the consciousness is permanent. So when one conceives that the consciousness is permanent, then one will conceive a notion that when the person had passed away, this consciousness will leave the body, and the same consciousness will take birth again in another form or in another body. So this way of conceiving actually is conceiving with wrong views of DT. Or when the perception is wrong, one conceives that the suffering and happiness experienced by a person is by chance, or being fated to experience in this way. Or in other words, when one has the notion that one is fated to be success or failure, or success or things is happening by chance. So this way of conceiving is also conceiving a kind of conceiving of views, or wrong views. Or sometimes one conceives that one is more superior than another, or one's equal to others, or others are inferior to him or her. So this conceiving, this way of conceiving is because of mana, or conceit, or ego. So one could conceive in this way due to the perception of the sense objects. For example, one perceives to the eye base, there was idols, the way of living of this person, the clothing of this person, the watch of wearing by that person, and so on. So in that way, one perceives that one is more superior than that person, or one is equal to that person, or one is inferior to that person. So, in the way, this way of conceiving is conceiving due to conceit or mana or ego. Then, when one perceives that one would like to be living a luxurious life, a wealthy life, like this person or that person, then one is in fact conceiving with craving. Sometimes one performs a meritorious deed, for example, by offering beautiful flowers to the Buddha Rupa. Then one makes a wish by offering these beautiful flowers to the Buddha. May I be reborn in the future as a very beautiful or handsome person. So in other words, this way of conceiving is also conceiving due to craving. It's because one perceives the visible objects beautiful, attractive, give rise to a lot of sensual pleasure of seeing it. So it is because of taking delight in this way, then one conceives an idea to be like this. So as long as one has not yet attained enlightenment, one always conceives things with craving, tanha, mana, conceit or egoism, and ditthi, wrong view. So craving, conceit or egoisms and wrong view are known as three kinds of papancha, or three kinds of obsessions. So when the mind dwells on these thoughts and the eyes keep on perceiving the object which is beautiful, attractive, give rise to a lot of sensual pleasure to seeing. When one dwells on it again and again, craving will be growing or increasing. So one can reflect on their own experience. Since one is born and endowed with the intelligence to make distinction and so on. The eyes, the ear, the nose and so on, you'll be perceiving various sense objects all the time. For example, if one perceives a very muscular man, then one might think, I would like to be like him permanently. Or when one perceives through the eyes the life of those living in the high-class society and so on, then one may conceive, I would like to live a life like those in the high-class society. One might conceive that I do not want to join others or live with others who is not of same standard with me. So, while perceiving various sense objects, the mind also conceives various ideas or thoughts. But one may not realize that one has been conceiving the world with craving, tanha, or attachments, with conceit mana and wrong view or ditthi. So when there are three kinds of illusions and these three kinds of papancha accompanying the conceiving, then one will not be able to realize the end of the world, or one will not able to reach the end of the world. So when we say that one is the perceiver of the world, one is the conceiver of the world, this is about conventional reality. So there are two types of truth taught by the Buddha. One is the conventional truth, the other is ultimate truth. So in the teaching of conventional truth, we say that a person such as an I or you does exist. There's a perceiver, there's a conceiver, and so on. But as long as one has not yet realized the ultimate truth, then one will cling to this conventional world. In the teaching of ultimate truth, Paramatha Satya, we say that a being such as an I or you doesn't exist. There's no perceiver, there's no conceiver. So when there's this notion of I, then this notion I will give rise to the will of a self or an ego. So an I or you will desire for sensual pleasure or dislike, pain, suffering. That's why worldlings always crave for sensual pleasure, various kinds of happiness they can gain from enjoying various sensual objects and so on. So when there's craving, tanha, that craving will lead to rebirth again and again. For example, sometimes devotees also doing marriage with a wish to be born in the Deva world. So it's because they have the idea that the life of Deva world is full of sensual pleasures, is delightful. The life in the Deva world is not permanent. The life in the Deva world also subject to passing away. So in other words, these six sense spaces are known as the world because it's a condition for one to be a perceiver and conceiver of the world. So in other words, how does one perceive the world? How does one conceive the world? And through this conceiving, what action has been taken will eventually give rise to the results or the feelings. For example, if one conceive with a mana that I am more superior than others, those who are not superior equal to me, if they are not of same standard with me, I will not allow them to join my activities, to be my friends, and so on. So one can become arrogant, because thinking of one is always more superior than others. So in that way, others might dislike him because of his behavior, which is very arrogant. So if one wish to reach the end of the world, then one must develop right perception. One must overcome these three kinds of papancha or obsessions. For example, due to craving, when craving is so strong, clinging also getting stronger. Sometimes due to craving for living a life in the high-class society, one may even go to the extent of violating the moral precepts and the law of countries in order to be one like those in the high-class society. In other words, one might earn one's wealth unrighteously, unlawfully. So when one has violated the moral precepts or the law, eventually one may experience painful results or painful feelings due to one's own violations of morality. So in the way, the world of the person is suffering. So the teachings of the Buddha always aim to develop right view. So in other words, if there are no illusion, then one would see things correctly. For example, when there's no illusion of perception, no illusion of mind, no illusion of will, then one would takes the impermanent to be impermanent, what is suffering to be suffering. When there's no illusion of perception, or no illusion of mind, no illusion of will, then one would take what is not self to be not self, or what is unattractive to be unattractive. So when there's no illusion, then one would see or takes what is not self as not self, or what is unattractive to be unattractive. And then one would be able to overcome the three kinds of papancha or obsessions, or craving, conceit or egoisms, and wrong view. So in other words, as long as one is not yet enlightened, in other words, one is a worldling, putujana, there are these defilements lying dormant in the mind. So there are various mental defilements lying dormant in the mind. Craving is one of them. Ignorance is also one of them. So in other words, there are these three stages of mental defilements. The first stage of defilement is known as anusaya kilesa. In other words, those mental defilements lying dormant in the mind or in the continuum of the five aggregates. The second stage is known as pariyutana kilesa. Those mental defilements that have been manifested or have arisen in the mind. So when one is not able to control pariyutana kilesa, for example, anger or hatred that has arisen in the mind, then that strong anger or hatred can become a cause to a person to violate moral precepts, such as the first precepts, and so on. So the defilements that causes or motivates a person to commit evils or violate moral precept is known as vitikama kilesa. The first stage of defilements, anusaya kilesa, consists of two kinds. The first is known as santana anusaya. So santana anusaya kilesa those the defilements that are lying dormant in the mind since the beginningless of the samsara. The second kind of anusaya kilesa is known as aramana anusaya kilesa. Aramana anusaya kilesa are those defilements which are lying latent or in the sense objects. So in other words, certain sense objects may provoke certain mental defilements. For example, if you do not see your enemy, you may not have any feeling of anger or hatred arising in the mind. But as soon as you see your enemies or the person whom you hate, there will be immediate uprising of this anger or hatred. So these defilements arise, which are lying latent in the sense object, are known as aramana anusaya kilesa. So it's not difficult to understand aramana anusaya kilesa. When you reflect on your own experience in life, you may realize that certain visible objects, sounds or voice, or even, and so on, would cause the arising of mental defilements or provoke the mental defilements to arise. So defilements can arise when there's a contact with certain sense object, because one had not yet realized the true nature. For example, the mind always dwells on the thoughts of this enemy or that enemy, on their wrongdoings, what they had done to me, what harm they had done to me, and so on. Then the anger will be growing or increasing. So sometimes one even thinks that this defilement, anger or hatred towards this person or that person, has been staying permanently in my mind. So this is what I call illusion of the mind, illusion of view, illusion of perception. This because one has not realized everything arising is due to condition. Or in other words, one has not realized paticca samuppada, the teaching or the law of conditionality. So it's important to develop wisdoms or right understanding. In those wisdoms that leads to realizations of conditionality, and those what's arising dependent on condition, also subject to passing away. So one has to develop wisdoms, such wisdoms, through one's own effort. There are three kinds of wisdoms or knowledge, panya in Pali. The first kind of wisdoms is Suttamaya panya. Panya or wisdom that is developed or gained by hearing from the teachers or by reading. So such wisdom is gained without direct experience, without personal experience. It's merely hearing from others. It's because during the Buddha's times, all learned by hearing or listening from the Buddha or other bhikkhus. But nowadays, Suttamaya panya, it also includes reading. The second kind of panya is Cintamaya panya. Cintamaya panya is wisdom that is gained by one's own thinking, reasoning, or analyzing. After hearing from the teacher or others, or after reading certain books on the Dhamma or on the practice of meditation. So, Cintamaya Panya is wisdom, is also wisdom that is not gained through direct experience or personal experience. Suttamaya Panya and Cintamaya Panya do not enable a person to overcome the mental defilements or to uproot the mental defilements. Suttamaya Panya and Cintamaya Panya may help to lessen a little bit of mental defilements, but not, but only temporarily. So, what's been emphasized is Bhavana Maya Panya. In other words, wisdom that is developed or gained through mental development, mental culture, or in other words, meditations. So, only one who has gained Bhavana Maya Panya will be able to overcome the mental defilements gradually and eventually to uproot the mental defilements, anusaya kilesa, completely. So if one aspires to develop Bhavana Maya Panya, then one needs to practice mindfulness meditation, insight meditation. So one needs to develop mindfulness on whatever sense objects arising at the six sense doors. If one doesn't mindful of any sense objects, then one might think that I, for example, hear the voice, I see this beautiful object. Then one might also think this sense object is everlasting or lasts for a long time. If the sense objects are agreeable, desirable, then one might think or wish that this pleasurable sense object will not subject to passing away or disappearance. Or sometimes due to strong craving, wrong view, conceit also, one might think that I alone can enjoy this sensual object. No one is allowed to enjoy this sensual. One can see that these six sense bases are related to the world of experience of oneself. The desirable sense object, agreeable sense object, give rise to pleasurable feelings, and then craving or longing for more and more. If the sense objects are not agreeable, undesirable, then there's a feeling of dislike or hatred when there's a contact with this disagreeable, undesirable sense objects. That's why we say that the world or the worldlings is full of craving, longing, and hatred, anger, dislike, or in other words, the feelings of the world, of the worldling, is either pleasurable or painful. Or in other words, the feelings of worldling is either pleasant or unpleasant. But those who begin to develop wisdoms by the practice of Satipatthana meditation or mindfulness meditation, then they may able to realize the true natures of conditioned phenomena clearer and clearer. So those mindfulness meditators may be able to realize what kinds of sense objects provoke the arising of anger, hatred, what kinds of sense objects provoke the arising of craving, tanha, or raga, lust, and so on. And through the practice of mindfulness, meditators will realize these defilements are the cause of mental suffering. If they do not realize suffering, they will not make an effort to remove the mental defilements. So when mindfulness meditators have made progress in the practice of mindfulness and able to gain clearer and clearer insight knowledge, then they shall be able to overcome aramana anusaya kilesa. For example, when the mindfulness meditators hears the voice of his enemy or her enemy, if the mindfulness is not sharp at the moment of hearing anger or feeling of dislike or could be arising instantly, then the mindfulness meditators has to mindful of the mindful of the anger or the feeling of dislike. Sometimes meditators have to mindful and note the anger or feeling of dislike many times, then that anger or feeling dislike subsided. But the mindfulness meditators hears the voice of that enemy again, the anger or feeling of dislike can arise again and again. But if the mindfulness meditators can mindful and note these processes, for example, hearing the voice of the enemy, if there's an anger or feeling dislike arising, meditators mindful of these defilements as it really occurs again and again. Eventually they may realize that the mental defilements, anger, or the feeling of dislike is getting weaker and weaker. So when the mindfulness is sharp enough, meditators will be able to mindful of the hearing of the voice of the enemy. It's because when the mindfulness is sharp at the moment of hearing, meditators will realize hearing disappear, the hearing consciousness has disappeared instantly. Then it seems there is no defilement, anger or feeling of dislike arising like previously. It's because when the mindfulness is sharp at the moment of the object has arisen, meditators will realize that object will pass away instantly. So that something which is arising dependent on condition and subject to passing away is not possible to cling to conditioned phenomenon which is arising and passing away instantly. It's because at that moment it's not possible that there's a notion of I who hears the voice of that enemy. It's because at that moment there's merely an arising of hearing consciousness, and then that hearing consciousness condition the arising of mindfulness, or another consciousness that cognizes the consciousness of hearing. So the notion of an I, the notion of an I or person always is the immediate cause of the arising of various mental defilements. So in other words, when meditators have made progress in the practice mindfulness meditation and able to develop clear insight knowledge, realizing the true nature of conditioned phenomena, then they shall be able to overcome aramana anusaya kilesa gradually. So in that way, meditators might be able to experience certain degree of calmness of the world. So in other words, meditators experience calmness to a certain degree in the mind. But the santana anusaya kilesa can only be uprooted when meditators have attained supramundane path knowledge. The pariyutana kilesa can be overcome through the practice of concentration meditation or mindfulness meditation as well. Vitikama kilesa can be overcome by observance of morality, or such as 5 precepts. For example, when defilements such as anger, hatred have arisen in the mind, but if the person is firm in the observance of 5 precepts or morality, then one is able to control one's anger. In other words, one is able to control oneself so that not to violate moral precepts or to commit unwholesome body actions and unwholesome verbal actions. So, in order to attain cessation of the world, the conditions must not arise again. It's because as long as there are 6 sense bases, then there will be processes of perceiving and conceiving. Then there will be perceiver and conceiver of the world. But if there are no arising of 6 sense bases, then there are no processes of perceiving and conceiving. In other words, there are no perceiver, no conceiver. That's why one who has understood the teachings of Paticca about the conditionality, one will realize that one has to uproot the condition. So if the condition, for example, ignorance, avidya, craving, tanha, clinging, upadana are not yet uprooted, then one is not able to reach the end of the world. So the way to reach the end of the world is by developing the Noble Eightfold Path fully. If one aspires to develop the Noble Eightfold Path fully, then one has to take up the practice of Satipatthana meditation. In other words, the practice of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So this teaching of the Buddha about going to the end of the world is very practical, is very relevant to our life. So I wish all pious yogis, all upasakas and upasikas, always heedful to the teachings of the Buddha. In other words, living a holy life by the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path diligently, and eventually able to uproot anusaya kilesa and attain cessations of the suffering of reaching the end of the world.